All right, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another Earth Echo Google Plus Hangout on Air. I just wanted to step in and say hello. My name is Allie Toomey. I'm the Education Coordinator for Earth Echo International. And before we get started today, I just wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, this Hangout thrives on participation. We want all of you to ask questions and get involved. In order to ask questions, there are two different ways that you can ask questions on today's Hangout, depending on how you're watching. If you are watching from Google+, you can submit questions right in your viewing window using the Q&A app that you'll see on your screen there. If you see someone that has the same question as you, go ahead and give that a +1. We'll know that more than one person has that question, and we'll try to get that answered as soon as possible. If you are watching on the Earth Echo website, underneath the video player, you should see a Google question form. Go ahead and submit your question, and we will get those answered as well. Those all come into me and Philippe right here. So you guys can go ahead and start posting your questions or your comments now. Let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know. All right. So as a follow-up from the release of Earth Echo's latest resources, Beyond the Dead Zone, we have teamed up with some amazing partners in innovation at the XPrize Foundation. Today, our expedition host and Earth Echo co-founder and president, Philippe Cousteau Jr. is at the Seattle Aquarium finding out more about the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health XPrize. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Philippe. Philippe, who do you have with you in Seattle?
Allie, first of all, hello everybody. We're really excited to be here working with XPrize. Such an amazing program that they're engaged in here at the wonderful Seattle Aquarium, where we are actually hosting us today and tomorrow filming. You can see there's a lot of hustle and bustle going on behind us. There are student groups and classrooms. Right behind us is my favorite exhibit, the octopus exhibit, so there's always a lot of interest there. And one of the octopus, I think her name is Eddie, was out this morning all around the tank, so that was a particular treat. But we're really excited to be here at the Seattle Aquarium working with XPrize because if you remember one of our recent Google Hangouts, we were with Dr. Elsa Kuffner, who is working down in Biscayne Bay on issues around ocean acidification and the health of coral reefs. And one thing that Dr. Kuffner talked about was that the research community is just starting to get its head around ocean acidification as one of the major threats, not only to coral reefs, but to ocean ecosystems in general. And so, that's really the topic of this hangout. And we're so fortunate because we're able to participate in a program that XPrize has been engaged in, the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health XPrize, that's really focused around pH and overall the health of our oceans, because ocean acidification is something a lot of people haven't heard of, but is arguably one of the gravest threats that face our oceans today. And so sitting with me here today is a good friend of mine and really an incredible individual, Paul Bunchy. He is a senior director of ocean programs at XPrize and is running the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health XPrize initiative. And then we're also joined by one of the teams that's competing on the XPrize, Team C's, and Eric Kaltenbacher, who's here with us. We're really thrilled. He's going to be joining us in just a second. And I saw that, I know we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but it looked like it worked out. Debbie Hickson's students from South Broward High School, the Maritime Magnet Program, are with us as well. How you doing, everybody? We're thrilled to have you. So let's get started. Let's dive into it. So what I wanted to start out with actually is, Paul, I want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about what an XPrize is, how the challenges get designed and set up, who competes, etc. Walk us through that process. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, so an XPrize is a pretty unique thing, but it's kind of in the name right there. It's literally a challenge to anybody in the world that can solve what we call a grand challenge. Think of the biggest problems in the world, something like ocean acidification. And we put out there millions of dollars in prize money for anybody to compete and try to win that by creating a solution that we can define and measure and judge as being able to accomplish this remarkable feat. And the XPrize Foundation, we're an organization, a nonprofit, that does this in all kinds of different areas, from space exploration for teams that want to go to space or put a lunar lander on the moon, to healthcare, putting in the palm of your hands a device that can tell you whether or not your fever is worth going to the hospital about or not.
This is getting a lot of buzz out there. This is like the tricorder.
That's right.
Star Trek.
That's right. We got it's. In fact, we call it the Qualcomm tricorder XPrize because of that reason. Imagine being able to hold that tricorder. Are you sick, dude? Yeah, we like to think this is like incentivizing, right? Putting out there to those people that can create the future. You see it in science fiction. We want to bring that into science reality. And then we also do my favorite things. We're looking at helping the health of the oceans. What is it that we can do to get all of those brilliant people out there working together to help solve some of these big, giant, hairy problems in the oceans? And if you can, there's a couple $1 million on the table for you.
I know, that's the point. These prizes go for millions of dollars. I mean, these are big prizes to solve really big problems. Why pH? Why ocean acidification? So
that's you hit it earlier when you said ocean acidification is one of those grand challenges that a lot of scientists and other professionals that work in the oceans have raised this red flag about it being one of the most critical issues to ocean health. Ocean acidification, if you start to dig into the issues that are present as the pH goes down because of carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide that we put up into the atmosphere, about a quarter of that gets absorbed by the oceans. And as that happens, it lowers the pH. And as it lowers the pH, the water becomes more acidic. But creatures are very often finely tuned to exactly what pH they can survive in. And this is particularly true of things that make a shell. So oysters, clams, corals, because they make their shells out of something, this material, calcium carbonate, that's very sensitive to ocean acidity. So we took a look at this at XPrize and said, my lord, this is a really grand challenge that is threatening marine life, ecosystems, and ultimately the health of the planet because of how important the oceans, the sorts of things that you talk about, how important the oceans are to everything we do.
Of course, I mean, healthy corals is a critical habitat in the oceans, and also healthy everything from the small krill and the pteropods that make shells that form the basis of food chains.
That's right.
Everything from small fish all the way up to whales. So we're talking ocean food chains that are important for our economy and our food. Over 1 billion people get their primary source of protein from seafood. So ocean acidification literally does have a huge impact on human survival and the success of human civilizations going forward in the 21st century. So this is one of the big critical problems.
That's it.
I'm curious, Paul, tell me how does a challenge, walk me through the process quickly about how a challenge gets set up. You decide on a challenge, it's a big problem that you want to solve. Who can compete in a challenge, and what's the process that they have to go through in a nutshell?
So we go through a big, long process. If you take something that big and hairy, right, it's almost like the scientific process. You got to break that down into parts that can be addressed. And so with something like ocean acidification, we started looking at how it is that we could begin to solve the problem. Well, there's a very first critical step that hadn't even been addressed, and that was having the tools to even measure the problem effectively. Right? And this would literally be like sticking your hand on the back of your forehead and saying, I've got a fever that I think is really bad, and maybe I should go into the hospital. Right? Well, there's a big difference between a fever that might kill you and a fever where a couple of Tylenol is sufficient. With ocean acidification, we didn't even have that thermometer. That
so
basic
we had the hand test.
We had the hand test.
That's not accurate enough to tell whether you got a fever that'll kill you or a fever that'll Tylenol.
That's right. So we like to say you can't solve what you're not measuring. Right? So if you want to solve ocean acidification, you need to be able to measure it better. And we knew that there were people working on this challenge. There were a couple of companies out there that had already been building pH sensors that could work in the ocean. And there have been a lot of researchers, like folks like Eric that you're seeing here, that have been thinking about this for a long time. So we broke down this challenge and said, what we're going to do is put together a prize for breakthrough pH sensors. Devices that can go out into the ocean, anywhere, the deep sea, those coral reefs we talk about, and quickly, easily measure with unprecedented accuracy what the pH really is. And that's the kind of tool, that's the kind of data that then gives other scientists and managers and anyone that might care about or receive those benefits, the seafood like you talked about, from the oceans, the tools to do it. So when we designed that,
that points out a really important point of the scientific process, right? Which is you have to have baseline data. You have to understand the basics of where you're starting from to be able to measure changes. And not having adequate tools to do that obviously limits our ability to be able to do that kind of testing. So, we've talked a little bit about what the XPrize is in general, focused specifically on the ocean acidification process. So who can compete in an XPrize, and what is the process these teams are going through?
So anybody can compete. This is the baseline, right? If you've got a grand challenge and it's not being solved, that means that the people you think can solve it aren't able to do it. What we want to do is open up to the world, right? There's a brilliant idea somewhere in the world, but by putting up millions of dollars, somebody is likely to be able to solve that problem. So quite literally, anyone can compete. In this prize, we've got a team of high school students.
High school students that are competing for a multi-million-dollar prize.
They are, and they're competing quite well, all the way up to researchers like Eric that have been working on ocean chemistry for many, many years. We've got people out of industries that had never even thought of the ocean before, teams from Austria and Ohio. We've got teams that come out of industries in biotech, where they're now starting to think about how it is they can address oceans and not just healthcare. So it's literally anyone can compete because we believe innovation comes from anywhere.
From anywhere. And as Paul pointed out, there are young people and high school students that are competing in these big prizes. So it's not just grad students, it's not just professional scientists. And so we're going to keep talking a little bit about what's happening here, specifically at the Seattle Aquarium. Remember, though, send in your questions, and we'll answer them throughout. You don't have to wait until the end. I have my phone here, and Allie will be asking me any questions that come through. So please, if you guys have any questions, anybody out there watching, send them through. But so before we keep talking about what's happening, particularly here inside, I want to go to Eric and at Team C's and have him walk us through a little bit of what he's doing to compete for the Ocean Health XPrize.
Yeah, so about the exercise, and a little background, I guess the technique that we use for measuring pH in the ocean is very similar to what people would use for measuring pH back home in their swimming pools. And so we have it's an optical measurement where you, back in your swimming pool, right, you have a little cuvette that you add some drops of reagent in, and you compare the color of that solution to a reference chart, and that's how you gauge the pH. Well, our instrument works very much the same way. It's just that we measure the color of that sample solution very, very accurately. And so I thought it might be kind of fun to show a picture of the instrument here. And so I'm showing our entry here. And just for an idea of scale, the instrument is overall, it's about 2 feet long, and it's about 8 inches in diameter. And on this, this part of the instrument here, this is just a pressure housing that protects the electronics and the batteries, keeps them dry while they're deployed in the ocean. And up at the front end, we've got this is the business. This is the sensing end of our instrument, where we have our optical cell. This is where we mix the seawater with our reagent, and we measure the pH all up at this end of the instrument here. And so again, just looks at the optical qualities of the water, and we get pH to better, actually pretty good accuracy. And we're going to find out actually at the end of this competition just how well we can do. And so doing a project like this is really a lot of fun for us. And just as Paul stated for designing the XPrize, we start off at the top. What is it we design a goal? What is it that we're trying to do? And we break it down from there in terms of steps of, well, we know we need to have fluidic pumps, in our case, to move the fluids. We need to have a light source. We need to have a container that can house the electronics to keep them dry. And so we list all those things out, and we start breaking them down further. Well, what has to go into them? What are the properties? And so it's pretty much starting off with getting everyone together at the same time and saying, this is what we're trying to do, and this is how we're going to do it step by step.
So Eric, it's basically a problem-solving rubric that you're going through, saying here's the problem and how do we essentially solve that problem, what are the steps you need to go through. I'm curious, when you sat down, what motivated you? Why did you decide that you wanted to participate in this XPrize and this challenge?
Well, this particular XPrize to me was very interesting because, you know, as Paul mentioned, we've been working in ocean chemistry for a number of years, and so we've been aware of the problem of ocean acidification for a little while now, and but it's not something that the general population community, lots of people don't know about this, that this is an issue, and that it can impact everyone really on the planet. And so when I heard about this competition and the fact that we had a technology that we thought we could adapt for it, I was really excited because I saw this as an opportunity to really bring awareness to, you know, to the world that this is a problem that we need to think about and figure out what we need to do.
So Eric, I want to talk, and Paul, I want to talk about this problem a little bit more, and maybe give people a little bit clearer concept of what the system looks like, because I think a lot of people recognize that CO2 is a pollutant in the atmosphere. Of course, CO2 occurs naturally in the atmosphere, but it's all, you know, there's an old saying, there's no such thing as poison, only poisonous amounts, and that it's really fundamentally about degrees and amounts. And so we're putting so much more CO2 in the atmosphere than should be in the atmosphere to maintain our stable climatic system. We're essentially taking that CO2 primarily out of the ground, putting it in the atmosphere, as well as cutting down the trees that help to regulate that CO2 system and that cycle. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the oceans are a critical part of that climatic cycle. And so, Eric or Paul, can you talk us through a little bit about what does this cycle look like? How does that work, and why is CO2? You mentioned the fact that it's causing the oceans to be more acidic, because fundamentally the oceans are carbon sinks. So the oceans absorb a lot of the CO2 that we put up into the atmosphere. Can you talk us through a little bit more about that process of what's happening in the big picture?
Eric, why don't you describe the carbon cycle a little bit, what Philippe is talking about?
Well, so yeah, the carbon cycle is really the process where you're starting at the beginning where CO2 is produced, whether it be through natural processes or things that mankind is doing, and it goes up into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide gas. From there, it actually does a number of things, one of which, about a quarter of it, as Paul said, you know, enters the water. And when it enters that water, it reacts with the seawater to form what's called carbonic acid. And so it's this acid and its components that actually works to lower the pH of the water. And now the carbon that's also used in the water is used by animals, critters. Actually, they use carbon all the time as part of their life. They need carbon to actually generate the food and the energy that they need to survive. And so some of the carbon is actually good, and it's this whole process of how that carbon is generated and then enters into the atmosphere, into the oceans, and some is used by the animals, some is used to actually change the chemistry of the water. And this is what we're finding out, is that we're producing so much CO2 that there's an excess going into the water that's not being used by animals, and so that's what's actually lowering the pH of the water.
So I have a bunch more questions, but I know we have a student from Debbie's class here with a question. So we're going to throw it to you, and please introduce us. Tell us your name and ask a question or whatever you have.
Hi. So my question is, like, after this contest is completed and you find the instrument that works to find these results, what are you guys gonna do to change the acidification or help reverse the effects?
Paul, that's a great question.
Yeah,
for you.
That's a fantastic question. I'm partly going to turn that back to you. What are you going to do to help reverse some of these effects, essentially?
I'm not sure yet.
Well, this is, and the reason I don't mean that, put you on the spot. No, but really, it's a bright question, because what you're dealing with is, once we have those measurements and you know exactly where and when that pH is starting to change in a way that might affect the critters, the animals that Eric was talking about, then there's a series of steps that need to be taken, right? And that goes all the way back up to the amount of carbon dioxide that's ultimately getting into the oceans in the first place. You mentioned this, that carbon dioxide, the excess amount that's there, is primarily a result of the fossil fuels that are being burned to produce energy, right? So coal and natural gas and oil and the like. So ultimately, the balance of carbon dioxide, either in the air or, in this case, in the oceans, is affected by those choices around energy. So there's a lot of things, as you might imagine. I'm sure you've all learned a lot about sort of how energy and climate change and that works. But there's a lot that can also be done once you get into the water itself. One of the things that we're just starting to learn is that different creatures that live in the ocean can handle different amounts of change in ocean acidity. In other words, there are some corals, for example, that may be able to handle a change in ocean acidity because of their natural biology. Then there are other corals that can't. Well, if you're going to solve the sort of impacts that might be affecting these, we need to first know where those are, what species of corals can handle this type of thing, and whether or not there are other, what we call stressors, that might be impacting things. Temperature change, pollution that's going in there that you might be able to prevent from going in there. And it's those kinds of actions that people, either in local governments, if there's stormwater that's polluting nearby habitat that's exacerbating things, and you might be able to take that out to give the corals a chance to live, all the way up to direct interventions of certain species that need to be better cared for, let's say, or better protected in what we call marine protected areas, basically national parks for the seas, in order to help them survive the sort of changes in acidity.
Well, you bring up a great point, Paul, and this does go right back to you all, fundamentally, everybody that's watching, not just your class. What's your name, young man?
Frankie.
Frankie. So it's not just you, it's not just your class, it's everybody that's watching, everybody that's participating, because what XPrize is all about is giving better information and data so that we can help to combat some of the gaps in the knowledge that we have, and that we can then also combat some of the people that take advantage of that gap of information to be able to push an agenda to continue to push fossil fuels, to continue to fight against renewable energy, etc. And so the more knowledge that we have, the better equipped that we are to be able to make better decisions on who we vote for and what consumer choices we make. And I think what's also important, Paul brought this up, this is really important, is that what we're finding is that in many ways, corals and oysters, etc., are similar to humans, in that if they're already suffering from pollution, coastal pollution, say runoff and nitrogen or phosphorus or chemicals, if they're already sick because of overfishing and nets being dragged over them, that when the acidification increases, then they are unable, really ill-equipped, they're already sick. So let's say, for example, in human context, if a human being already has meningitis and, tuberculosis, they're already sick, and then all of a sudden they get cancer, there's no chance. There's really no hope of surviving. So the key is to make sure that these ecosystems are as healthy as possible. And what are the kinds of local things that we can make sure? Pollution reduction, fisheries control, marine protected areas, so that we give them the best possible chance to be as healthy as possible, so that as ocean acidification rises, even if we cut off all carbon dioxide today, all excess carbon dioxide, that cycle is still on a 20 or 30 year lag time. Ocean pH is still going to lower and the acidification is still going to rise. So what we can do is recognize that other impacts, other work that's being done in conservation has a really almost more important impact now, because of these big global problems that will take decades to solve. There are things we can do locally right now that make a big impact to help create healthy ecosystems so they can be as resilient as possible. It's a resiliency issue that we're talking about. So do you all have another question you want to follow?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Philippe, you brought this up. This is a great little piece of fact about how this affects things. pH is measured in these pH units, and neutral water is 7, right? It goes from 0 to 14. Normal ocean pH is about 8.2. In other words, before the Industrial Revolution, it's about 8.2, a little basic. And it's been lowering, and it's down a little less than 8.1 now. Well, if that changed, like 0.1, 0.15 pH units happened in a human, you'd be in intensive care with a condition called acidosis. And you're exactly right that humans that are already sick, that end up with acidosis, have almost no chance of survival. And we're seeing the exact same amount of change has happened in the last 150 years in the oceans, as if it happened in your body, you would be on your deathbed, basically. So that's really what we're dealing with, and you need to make sure all of the rest of those impacts and stressors aren't there, so that humans, or coral reefs, as it were, have the best chance of survival.
Yeah, I think that's a really shocking concept, Paul, that if you think about how much the pH level has dropped in the oceans, if our normal pH body in our bodies dropped as much, we'd be in the hospital. So already, that's a great comparison. Before we go back to Debbie's class, I have a question actually from students from a classroom in Ohio. It's asking, is it only oceans that are acidifying, or are these issues affecting freshwater resources as well? That's a really, really terrific question. Maybe I was going to jump to Eric.
So yeah, no, this is something that I should say that I'm not a chemist, right? I'm an electrical engineer, an optical engineer, but this is something that is affecting waters across the planet, and so things like the Great Lakes are things that people are looking at as well for being impacted by this condition. Yeah, it's an excellent question.
Because of course there are freshwater creatures, freshwater snails, things like that that have to do the same process to build their shells. So yes, freshwater is also being affected by ocean acidification. That is a terrific question. So I want to jump to actually another question we have from another school in Florida about the device itself. Is this device, maybe this question for Paul, is this device that can be used also in tanks, in aquariums, as well as being deployed in the ocean or in freshwater? Or is this really just for the ocean?
No, that's a great question. So the competition, when we run any XPrize, we're incentivizing, we're asking and rewarding one specific thing. And in this case, it's devices that can measure the pH of the ocean from coastal areas, like where we are in Seattle, to the ocean's depths. But what we see in an XPrize competition, and this kind of gets to the what happens after the prize question we had before, is that innovation, the ideas that these teams come up with, can be applied across the gamut. And in fact, we're already seeing some of these teams create devices that very easily could go straight into an aquarium, could go into the Great Lakes or a river. And in fact, we've even told the teams that $1 million of the $2 million total purse is really up to those that can not only be really incredibly accurate in measuring pH, but also are easy to use. And that means that they've got to do something where you can get the data maybe on your smartphone, for example. We have a couple of teams that have created devices that can do that. In fact, one of the teams, I don't know if anybody in the audience there are surfers, but one of the teams has actually put their pH sensor on a surfboard fin, and it links directly up to a smartphone, so that any surfer that goes out and is surfing can get 20-30 minutes worth of data on the pH of the seas, and it comes straight back and gets uploaded either to them, but also it can go straight into what scientists might want to be able to do to monitor the health of your local base.
And that's the great thing about these prizes, that it breeds this kind of innovation. So I want to jump to back to Debbie's class. I see another student. Please tell us your name and fire away.
Hi, my name is Aaliyah, and my question is, once you guys have figured out the instrument to measure the pH in the ocean, how are you guys going to implement it worldwide to reduce the pH and reduce acidification in the ocean?
That's an excellent question, and that's the beginning of it. One of the phrases that we have is that the day a prize, an XPrize, is awarded is really the day the hard work begins. Right? That's when we've got here in Seattle 14 teams that are still competing. This is down from 77 worldwide that originally said, I think I can build this device. Well, there are 14 that are still in it, right? It's like a race, right? Including Team C's and Eric, who are doing phenomenally well. But at the end of this, we expect at least all 14 of those to begin selling their devices to people that need it. We also are building programs, including with Earth Echo, in ways to get some of these devices into the hands of students, for example, who can do monitoring of local water bodies. We're working with other groups from the World Bank to NASA on potential programs to put these in the hands of schools around the world as well. And really it gets to what you were saying, Philippe, to answer your question. Everybody basically needs to be able to measure the chemistry of the water in their backyard in order to make those right choices about what to do.
Yeah.
And there are already groups that are set up to start responding, right? There are already protected areas from Indonesia to Africa to in your backyard there. And managers who are professionals ready to say, this is what we should do from runoff that might be polluting, this is where we might prevent fishing from happening because it's damaging. All they need is that piece of data to allow them to make the right choice. So after the prizes, we're going to start rolling them out. Hopefully you'll have one in your hands.
Well, exactly. I was just going to say that. Being down in Broward County, I've spent a lot of time, lived down in Florida for a couple of years when we first started Earth Echo. And fundamentally, this is a tool that we need to put in the hands of lots of different people. And so I think one of the great elements is to remember about XPrize is that it's not all about just building these tools and giving them out to people. This is also an opportunity for the teams to build a business too that's sustainable. Again, high school team that's competing in this. So the idea is that we can sell these monitors. The winning team, or many of the teams, will be able to sell these monitors so that schools, groups, scientists, etc. around the world, and we can start to get this broader picture of changes in the pH in real time, over a long period of time, so that we can make those better decisions for policymakers. Remember, that's up to us who we vote for. It's for our choices about what kind of cars we drive, what kind of food we eat, all of those types of things have a carbon footprint, have an impact on this issue of ocean acidification.
So one thing you can do, in fact, on this is Broward County will have a Department of Sanitation or a stormwater district of some sort. They actually right now are required to measure things like pH, but typically don't have the tools to do it. Well, you've got a team from Florida just across the way there, based in St. Petersburg. You see Eric there. Hook them up. Connect them with your local government. We got a question from Ohio. There's a team from Ohio State University that's competing. Just literally, you all can go in and say, I'm not sure if you're aware, but you need to be able to measure pH really accurately, and I can connect you with some experts that are competing in an XPrize, like Team C's from Florida, that will be able to help them with the devices they need to do exactly this.
Well, and I'm curious, Eric, I've got a question for you all too. Are there any particular challenges that you encountered that you didn't expect, maybe that you didn't expect, and any innovations that you can share? I know you don't want to give away some of your secrets, but any particular innovations that you were surprised by, or that you had to challenge you had to overcome, and innovation you had to develop in order to make it this far in the contest?
Well, yeah, we had several challenges actually come to mind, but I think one that really stands out is actually designing the sensor to work at depth in the ocean. And so part of the competition is actually testing the sensors down to a depth of 3,000 meters. And that equates to roughly 4,500 psi of pressure, pushing on this housing, trying to basically crush it. And so part of our instrument, has those fluidic pumps. And so we need to protect the motors and things from the environment, but we need the pump head to be outside actually moving the fluid. So how do you do that? And there's ways to maybe seal a shaft that would penetrate the housing, things like that, but those are difficult and they can fail over time. And being a little bit of debris gets in there, they can wear away that seal, and then you have a leak and your instrument stops functioning. So one of the things that we were able actually to do, we built the housing out of titanium, so it's largely non-magnetic, and we were actually then to couple our drive motors inside the instrument to our pump heads outside using magnets. And so this allowed us to have basically eliminated any seal or possibility for a failure associated with seals and leaks, and make a very strong housing that can protect the instrument and survive under those extreme pressures.
Paul, I'm curious, how big is the prize for this program?
So the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health Prize, XPrize, is $2 million that's on the table. Like I said, we broke that $2 million up to emphasize two really important things. Yeah, I know,
It's a lot of money.
I'd like that.
Why did I compete on this?
So, yeah, $1 million of that is for what we call the accuracy. This is devices such as what Team C's is building that can go to the bottom of the ocean. It's hard to go to the bottom of the ocean. 3,000 meters. Imagine the amount of pressure that you're experiencing right now times 300. 300 atmospheres of pressure, basically, doing 4,500 psi that you have to deal with. That's hard to do. Then on the flip side, $1 million for those devices that can go anywhere, because right now we're not measuring the deep sea and we're not measuring the coastal waters. And that was something so this is sponsored by Wendy Schmidt, a philanthropist, a benefactor, and she recognized as well. She said, look, this is the kind of thing we need to get in the hands of everybody. The scientists that need to go to the bottom of the ocean, to the local schools that want to be able to measure what's happening in their local waters.
Well, and to put it in context, we hear a lot about NASA and a lot about astronauts and spacewalks and walking on the moon. But the environment in the deep ocean is actually more hostile than the environment in space.
That's right.
So these scientists are dealing with more hurdles than the scientists at NASA, who are putting these kinds of instruments out in space. Putting these instruments at the bottom of the ocean is actually more difficult, more complex. So very impressive, Eric, that you all are doing that. And before I get to the next question from Debbie's school, I've actually got a class in Oregon as a specific question for Eric. how many different models have you made of your sensor? How many different sample models have you made, and how long has the design process been for you getting to this point right now?
So the first part of the question was how many sample bottles? Was that the question?
Yeah, how many sample models have you had to develop to get to this point, and how long has the design process been?
So we've been working on I guess I've been working on oceanographic sensors for about 15 years, and this particular sensor we actually started the design in May of last year. This is when we got our team together and officially had the go-ahead to actually enter the competition and proceed. So we worked pretty much nights and weekends from May through September to get ready for the competition. It was a short time scale, but normally these things, an instrument like this, if you're starting from ground zero, I would say you're looking at a year or two of actual development time to get it running. Since we had some prior experience and we had some really good people on our team, we were able to do it over about 4 months. It's really, like I say, I wish I could take the instrument apart to show you all the bits and pieces that go inside of it. There's, what you see on the outside, just a cylinder with some things sticking out, doesn't really capture all the details and things that go into making these instruments and the precision with which we're trying to make measurements. There's a lot of details in there.
Philippe, one of the things that you're hearing here that I love about this competition is the number of different types of expertise that need to go into it, right? You heard about the engineering that goes into this, the chemistry. There's computer science that goes into these to control the electricity, the power that goes, the data. And I've had a chance to see inside some of these devices, including a bit into Eric's. And it's remarkable how many different types of intelligent people need to work on something. And it's one of those things that's encouraging that maybe what you want to do is be a techie, you want to get in there and get your hands dirty. We need you in the oceans.
Well, that's a great point. This is really a marriage of lots of different STEM disciplines, right? You've got biology, you've got engineering, you've got chemistry, of course, physical sciences. So this is, when people are sitting in high school or middle school going, what on earth could this 9th grade biology class have to do with anything that's interesting or remotely reasonable or practical for a job or anything like that when I get out of school? This is a great example. There's a $2 million prize at play, and many prizes, or XPrize engages in, that leverages all those different disciplines and tools coming together. I know that we have another question from Decky's class, so why don't you introduce yourself and fire away.
Hi, my name's Alex. I have a question about the device. Is it something where we're going to be able to pinpoint where exactly it's coming from, how exactly it's hitting into the environment?
I'm sorry, I lost the transmission there part way through. It froze up, so I missed the last half of the question. Please repeat it.
No problem. Gotta love technology, right? So will your device be able to pinpoint where exactly it's getting into the ocean? Because the first step is figuring out how much of it's there to assess the situation. But once we assess that, will we be able to figure out how it gets into the ocean?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and so in theory, yeah, we could. I mean, the measurement that we take relies on just a very small fluid, right? So we sample a very small amount of fluid to take the measurement. But really, this is something that's entering the waters everywhere, and so it's really a global problem. And what we would need is actually a lot of sensors that would be deployed over wide areas to actually really understand the magnitude of the problem and map it out accurately. But so we can measure very pinpoint. We can measure at a very specific spot what the pH is at that location, but it's a function of lots of processes and averaging that's going on from the carbon dioxide entering the water on a large scale.
Thank you, Eric. We have a question here from Costa Rica. Always love it when we get the international questions here. And this is really interesting. I have to say something real quick before I ask this question. I spent a lot of time traveling around the world. I talk to adults, conferences, and by far the most innovative questions, the deepest questions, the most complex questions that I get are from young people and students. So this is a really interesting question. Would ocean acidification affect fish stocks and other pelagic species behavior? So not just does it affect their survival, but does it actually affect the behavior of pelagic? Let me remind everybody that pelagic are ocean-going, deep water, ocean-going fish, like tuna, swordfish, things like that. So that's an interesting question, Paul.
No, that's a great question, and it's a question that scientists have only just started to investigate. In fact, one of the people that's on my team at XPrize used to do this at Scripps Institution in San Diego when he was a graduate student. He would study how fish behavior responded to different levels of acidity. And it does, is the answer. We know in laboratory conditions it does. In fact, there have been a couple of studies where the fish almost look like they're woozy, or they haven't been sleeping, and it's like they're walking and sort of skipping down the highway as if they can't make sense of the world. But even more interesting is there's a researcher. We're partnering on this as the XPrize with a laboratory called the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory, which is run by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. There's a researcher there, Jeremy Mathis, who started to look at whether or not things like salmon and pollock being one of the most important fisheries in the United States. It's most of the white fish that you would eat in fish sticks or at McDonald's or anything. And the preliminary data indicates that it is a big concern, that those pelagic fish themselves are somehow affected by, these are finfish, right? So they're not making shells out of the calcium carbonate directly. But it seems that there's probably something in their biology that is affected by acidity. Unfortunately, we don't know enough yet, right? We still need the basic science to answer how, when, why. But every time scientists start to look, they say, oh, there's probably a problem.
Well, and you have to remember that fish and the creatures in the ocean are all responding to the whole system changing. Right? So if you get the smallest krill and the pteropods and the copepods and all these small little microscopic shell creating organisms that are either dying out or having to shift where they are in the oceans based on currents and different pH and acidity, then that is having a ripple effect all through the food chain.
Yeah, the best, you're absolutely right. The best example of this, we know, you mentioned these things called pteropods, which are, the more common name is sea butterflies. They're little zooplankton, little snails, tiny little snails, and they're heavily affected by ocean acidification. Well, in certain parts of the North Pacific, they make up about half of the diet of salmon. And so salmon being a really important fish, not only economically, but culturally, in many parts of the Americas and Europe as well. They're losing their diet. They're half their diet potentially to ocean acidification.
So we've got, I think we've got time, Alec, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got time for one more question. Here, we're almost, our time is up. So we're going to jump back to Debbie's class here. Introduce yourself and ask your question. Y'all are still muted. But while they're looking at that, another species of animal that we all love, and I remember back in the '80s growing up, it was all about save the whales. There's another great example of something, a big charismatic animal that we all love are whales, dolphins, etc. And particularly baleen whales, like humpback whales, etc. Feed primarily off of this type of zooplankton, krill and things like that. And so that's a direct line from this microscopic creatures that are heavily impacted by ocean acidification, all the way to things like whales, baleen whales in particular. And it's scary to think that after all the hard work that's been gone into trying to fight whaling and the killing of whales for their meat and oil and things like that, that other human behavior, like our addiction to fossil fuels, is threatening their future again. When they've only barely begun to recover. There are only 200 North Atlantic right whales left still today after decades of the whaling ban. There used to be hundreds of thousands of them. So already the oceans are heavily degraded and they've changed a lot. So this kind of tool is really important to help us on that. I think we lost Debbie's class. I think they were having a little bit of technical difficulties. Oh, they're back. They're back. Terrific. Okay. So, Debbie, go ahead and ask the last question.
My name's Zachary Cartwright, and the question I wanted to ask you is, are there action that young people can take right now to reduce or impact in the world?
Well, that's a great question, Zach. You know, the key is for people to remember, again, for you all to remember that whether you're 18 or not, I know it's high school here, so some of you might be 18 or close to it, but you know, who we vote for is really, really important. There are still politicians out there that are saying climate change is a hoax, that it's not happening, it's not real, and so these are people in the United States particularly that respond to votes. And you, whether you're 18 and able to vote or not, have a big influence on your peers and your family and the people around you to help them understand some of the reality and the science behind what's going on here, so that we can make better decisions about who we vote for and that we can cut through some of the rhetoric. I think one of the challenges we face today is a lot of things happen in 30-second sound bites. And it's important. Why we're doing all of this, why Earth Echo does all the work that we do, is to give you all the tools to think through, think more critically about the things you hear in the news, about the things that you hear on television from friends, from adults, and be able to say, you know what, that's not quite right, and here's why. Because this is what's grounded really in the facts and the information of science. And it's the same science that goes into climate change science, that goes into medical science. It's the same scientific process that we go through. So, you know, the same things that we develop drugs to cure cancer, it's the same kind of methodology we apply to climate change. So if we want to throw science out, then we better be willing to throw it all out. We can't just be selective about what we choose to not agree with or not believe. And as critical thinkers, you all understand that. And that's really important for you to spread that message and recognize that you have influence on the political process now, whether you can vote or not. That's one. The other thing is really thinking about food. One of the biggest carbon polluters in the world today is meat. I'm not saying we all have to go vegetarian, but we could do a much better job if we cut our our meat consumption down. That would be, and balanced it better with grains, fruits, and vegetables. It's all about balance, right? So we're not saying don't eat meat. What we're saying is that the idea that we need to have a more balanced diet. We all know that this country can be a lot healthier, and that would go a long way.
Yeah.
So
Michael Pollan has a great quote on what to eat. He says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. I think it's great, right?
That's a great quote, right? So it's who you vote for. It's what you eat. It's everything from plastic bottles and petroleum products and plastic bags. You know, people, there's a movement in the United States trying to ban plastic bags. They did it where I live in LA, in Los Angeles. They banned plastic bags, and there are certain companies and politicians that will say banning plastic bags is bad hurts jobs, it's bad for the economy, and will end up costing people more money. Well, in fact, the supermarket that I go to has doubled the amount of sales they can offer because they don't have to spend so much money buying the plastic bags. So the food is actually cheaper for people. And you know what? It's not that much of a burden to bring your own bag. We've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, having our own receptacles to put food into to move it around. So, you know, those kinds of simple things all the way up to the political process are the types of things that you can all do. So I think we've actually we've had such great questions, such great participation. I'm just going to check in with Ali here, but I think our time is up. And we really are so grateful to Paul and the entire team at XPrize, to the wonderful Seattle Aquarium, one of my favorite aquariums in the country, and all the teams that are competing at XPrize, and my team at Earth Echo, Debbie, your class for participating, and all the schools and classes and individuals around the world that participated. Thank you so much. Keep following this, and keep following. We're going to be updating on what's happening with XPrize and with particular XPrize over the next several months. We're here filming for the next 2 days. We're going to be developing all sorts of content out of this, so we're really excited. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
And everyone, be sure to check out our new expedition Beyond the Dead Zone materials. They are available online at earthecho.org. And then you can stay connected. If you have questions about anything, you can always reach out to us on social media and via email as well. Enjoy your day.